The ice cracked like gunshots beneath Marcus Chen's boots as he stumbled across Willowbrook Lake, his breath forming desperate clouds in the February air. Behind him, the rusty pickup truck sat abandoned on the shoreline, its engine still ticking in the silence, hazard lights blinking orange against the twilight snow. He shouldn't have been here. Should have been home, helping 8-year-old Emma with her math homework, pretending he had answers when his own world was crumbling faster than the rotting ice beneath his feet. But the scream had cut through the winter evening like a blade through silk, high, terrified, unmistakably human. Now, 50 yards from shore, Marcus could see her, a figure in an expensive-looking coat, dark hair fanned out like spilled ink against the white ice, one arm reaching desperately toward the surface while the rest of her body disappeared into the black water of the lake's center. "Hold on!" Marcus shouted, though his voice cracked with exhaustion that had nothing to do with the cold. 3 months of unemployment had left him hollow, his confidence as brittle as the February ice. The bank notice in his back pocket crinkled as he dropped to his knees, distributing his weight, crawling toward the woman who was now barely visible above the waterline. The lake held stories. Everyone in Millbrook knew that. Old Henrik used to say the water remembered everything. The lumber mill that once thrived on its shores, the families who'd built dreams here before the economy shifted and left them behind. Marcus's own grandfather had worked those mills, saved enough to buy the small house where Marcus now struggled to keep the lights on. The same house where Emma asked every night when Daddy would find another job, her 8-year-old faith in him both heartbreaking and terrifying. "Stay with me," Marcus called out, inching forward on his belly now, feeling the ice sag ominously beneath him. The woman's eyes, startlingly green even in the dim light, locked onto his with a mixture of desperation and something else. Recognition? Impossible. Marcus Chen was nobody special. A laid-off construction supervisor, a single father drowning in bills, a man who'd been invisible to the world long before this moment. But as he reached the hole where she'd fallen through, as his calloused hand wrapped around her wrist, expensive watch, manicured nails, skin soft from a life he couldn't imagine, something passed between them. Not just the shock of contact, but understanding. She wasn't struggling anymore, wasn't panicking. She was studying his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, as if she were memorizing every weathered line, every gray hair that had appeared since Sarah died 2 years ago. "I've got you," Marcus whispered, though he wasn't sure he had anything anymore. His savings account showed $127.43. His truck needed new brakes he couldn't afford. Emma's school clothes were getting too small, and the parent-teacher conference next week would reveal what he already knew. His daughter was falling behind because his father was falling apart. The woman's grip tightened on his forearm. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but crystal clear in the stillness. He nearly let go, nearly slipped backward on the ice in shock. "How do you—" "Pull me up first," she interrupted, though her tone was gentle, not commanding. "Then I'll explain everything." Marcus hauled with strength he didn't know he still possessed, adrenaline overriding months of defeat. The woman, petite but surprisingly solid, emerged from the hole like a determined seal, water streaming from her wool coat, her dark hair plastered to her skull. She couldn't be more than 40, though her eyes held decades of experience. As they crawled together toward the shore, Marcus caught glimpses of details that didn't belong in Millbrook. Designer boots that probably cost more than his monthly rent, a phone in a waterproof case that looked like something from the future, a wedding ring so simple that it had to be either very cheap or impossibly expensive. By the time they reached Marcus's truck, both were shaking, her from the cold, him from the delayed shock of what had just happened. He cranked the heat to maximum, the old Ford's vents wheezing warm air into the cabin. She sat in the passenger seat staring at her hands, and Marcus realized she was crying. Not the dramatic sobs he might have expected from someone who'd just nearly drowned, but quiet tears that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than fear. He pulled a thermos of coffee from behind his seat, the same coffee he'd been nursing all day while driving around pretending to look for work, avoiding the house where Emma would ask questions he couldn't answer. "Here," he said, unscrewing the cap. "It's not great coffee, but it's hot." She accepted the thermos with both hands, her fingers still blue-tinged from the cold water. "Thank you." Her voice carried an accent he couldn't place. Expensive education, probably East Coast, definitely not local. This isn't how I planned to meet you. Lady, I don't know who you think I am, but Marcus Chen, 34 years old, widower, father to Emma Chen, age 8, former construction supervisor at Hendricks & Associates until they laid off half their crew in November. Currently, 3 months behind your mortgage, driving a 2007 Ford F-150 with 180,000 miles and a transmission that's going to fail within 6 months. Marcus stared at her, his mouth dry despite the truck's growing warmth. "Who are you?" She set the thermos in her lap and looked directly at him. In the dashboard light, her green eyes were flecked with gold, and there was something familiar about her face that he couldn't place. "My name is Victoria Ashworth. I'm the CEO of Ashworth Industries." The name hit him like a physical blow. Everyone in the county knew Ashworth Industries, the tech conglomerate that had been buying up property all around Millbrook for the past 5 years, the company that locals either praised for bringing jobs or cursed for driving up property values, the company whose founder, according to Forbes, was worth approximately $3.2 billion. "You're lying," Marcus said, though even as the words left his mouth, he was remembering news photos, magazine covers glimpsed in grocery store checkout lines. The hair was different, shorter now, less styled, and she looked older than in the polished corporate headshots, but the bone structure was unmistakable. "I know this is overwhelming," Victoria said, her voice still gentle, "and I know you have no reason to trust me, but Marcus, I didn't fall through that ice by accident. I've been trying to find a way to approach you for months." The truck's heater was working overtime now, filling the cab with warmth that felt almost oppressive. Marcus cracked his window, needing the bite of cold air to convince himself this was real. "Approach me for what?" Victoria reached into her coat, still dripping lake water onto his cloth seats, and pulled out a folder wrapped in waterproof plastic. She handed it to him with the careful ceremony of someone passing along something precious and dangerous. "Open it, but know that once you do, both our lives are going to change." Marcus held the folder, feeling its weight. Through the plastic, he could see what looked like legal documents, photographs, official letterhead. His name was written on the tab in neat handwriting. "Ms. Ashworth? Victoria, please." "Victoria, I don't know what kind of game this is, but I can't afford to get mixed up in anything complicated right now. I've got a daughter to think about, bills to pay." "Your daughter is why I'm here," Victoria interrupted, and something in her tone made Marcus look up sharply. "Emma Chen, born June 15th, 8 years ago at Millbrook General Hospital. Mother, Sarah Chen, deceased. Father, listed on the birth certificate, Marcus Chen." Stop. But Victoria continued, her voice growing softer, more careful. "Sarah's maiden name wasn't Thompson. It was Ashworth. Sarah Ashworth. She was my younger sister." The world tilted. Marcus felt like he was falling through ice again, but this time there was no solid ground beneath, just questions and impossibilities, and the sudden, terrifying realization that his quiet life in Millbrook had been built on secrets he'd never suspected. "That's impossible," he managed. "Sarah grew up here. Her parents died when she was 16. Car accident, just like the one that took her from you." Victoria's voice broke slightly. "I was already in college, already involved in the family business. Sarah was supposed to come live with me, but she ran away.
changed her name, created a new identity, disappeared so completely that even with all my resources, it took me 8 years to find her. Marcus opened the folder with numb fingers. The first document was a birth certificate. Sarah Elizabeth Ashworth, born in Boston, Massachusetts. Parents, Robert and Margaret Ashworth. Next of kin, Victoria Ashworth. By the time I found her, she was married to you, happy. I hired a private investigator to keep tabs on her, make sure she was safe, but I never approached her directly. She'd made it clear she
Wanted nothing to do with the family business, nothing to do with the money or the complications that came with our name. Marcus flipped through more documents, photographs of Sarah he'd never seen, taken from a distance. Sarah leaving the diner after her late shift, Sarah pushing Emma on the swing set at Miller Park, Sarah laughing at something Marcus had said, her head thrown back in the unconscious joy he remembered and missed every day. "You were watching us," he said, the words tasting bitter. "I was protecting her. There are people in my world, Marcus, people who would have used Sarah against me if they'd known she existed. Keeping her secret kept her safe. But she's dead." The words came out harsher than Marcus intended. "So your protection didn't work very well, did it?" Victoria flinched as if she'd struck her. "No, it didn't. And I've spent the last 2 years wondering if things might have been different if I'd reached out to her. If I'd swallowed my pride and my respect for her wishes and just been there." Marcus found himself looking at financial documents now. Bank statements, investment portfolios, trust fund documents, all with Emma's name on them. "Sarah left something behind," Victoria said quietly. "Someone behind. A niece I've never met who doesn't know she has family beyond her father. A little girl who, according to my investigators, is brilliant and kind and struggling in school because her family is struggling financially." The numbers on the document swam before Marcus's eyes. Millions of dollars, more money than he could conceive of, set aside in accounts with Emma's name, waiting for her 18th birthday. "This is why you came here?" Marcus asked. "To tell me Emma is rich?" "I came here because Emma is family," Victoria said, "and because you, the man who loved my sister, who's raising her daughter with the same values Sarah believed in, your family too, whether we like it or not." Marcus closed the folder and handed it back to her. "I don't want your money." "I know you don't. That's exactly what Sarah would have said." Victoria smiled, the expression transforming her face completely. For a moment Marcus could see the resemblance, something in the way her eyes crinkled, the tilt of her head that was pure Sarah. "But this isn't about money," Victoria continued. "It's about connection. It's about Emma knowing where she comes from, understanding that she has options in life beyond what circumstances might dictate. And it's about me," her voice caught. "It's about me finally meeting the family I've been protecting from a distance for so long." Through the windshield, Marcus could see Willowbrook Lake growing dark, the ice reflecting the first stars. In a few hours, he'd have to go home and help Emma with homework, make dinner from whatever was left in the refrigerator, pretend everything was normal while his world rearranged itself around secrets and revelations. "If I'm family," Marcus said slowly, "why did you fall through the ice? You said it wasn't an accident." Victoria looked down at her hands. "Because I've been trying to work up the courage to approach you for months. I've driven by your house, sat in coffee shops where I knew you sometimes went, even attended one of Emma's school plays, sitting in the back, wearing sunglasses like some kind of stalker. I remember that play. Emma's class had performed a shortened version of The Wizard of Oz, and Emma was a munchkin with exactly 3 lines. I was so proud, taking pictures with my phone while fighting off the worry about whether I'd be able to afford the costume. I saw you there, saw how you looked at her, the pure love, the dedication, the way you were trying to be everything she needed despite—" She gestured at his worn jacket, his calloused hands. "Despite how hard things have been."
You still haven't explained the ice." Victoria laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "I thought if I could stage an accident, if you could save me, then I'd have a natural way to start a conversation. Gratitude, a reason to insert myself into your life that wouldn't seem completely insane. So you deliberately fell through ice in February, in a lake that could have killed you. I had a safety team positioned around the lake, divers, medical personnel, the whole thing. What I didn't count on was the ice being thinner than expected, or how disorienting the cold water would be, or," she looked directly at me, "or how completely I would panic when I realized I might not survive to meet my niece." Marcus started the truck, the engine coughing to life. "This is all crazy."
I know. Emma doesn't need complications in her life right now. She needs stability, routine, normal problems like math homework and friend drama. I know that too. And I don't need some billionaire CEO swooping in thinking she can fix our problems with money. "I'm not trying to fix anything," Victoria said quietly. "I'm trying to understand it, to be part of it, if you'll let me." Marcus put the truck in drive, then paused. "What exactly are you asking for?" "Dinner," Victoria said. "Tomorrow night. Let me meet Emma properly. Let me be her aunt, not some stranger with a checkbook. And let me tell you about Sarah, about the sister I lost, who became the woman you loved." The drive back to town was quiet, except for the truck's heater and the sound of Victoria's clothes slowly drying. Marcus found himself stealing glances at her, this woman who claimed to be connected to the two most important people in his life, who had literally fallen into his world carrying secrets that changed everything he thought he knew about his past and Emma's future. As they pulled into the parking lot of the Millbrook Inn, the town's only decent hotel, Victoria turned to him with an expression he couldn't read. "Marcus," she said, "there's one more thing. Something I need to tell you before tomorrow." He waited, engine idling. "The reason I've been trying to find the right way to approach you, the reason I hired investigators and sat in the back of school plays like some kind of coward, it's not just about Emma's inheritance or her trust fund." Victoria pulled out her phone, scrolled through something, then showed him the screen. It was a news article dated 3 months ago. Ashworth Industries announces major expansion in rural markets. "I've been planning to build a new facility here in Millbrook. Advanced manufacturing, clean energy technology, about 300 jobs to start. Good jobs, the kind that could revitalize a place like this." Marcus stared at the article, his mind racing. "You're telling me this because I want you to run it," Victoria said simply. "I want you to be the plant manager. Help me build something that would honor what Sarah believed in. Communities that take care of their own, work that means something, a place where families like yours can thrive." She got out of the truck before he could respond, leaning down to speak through the passenger window. "Marcus," she said, "there's one more thing. Something I need to tell you before tomorrow." He waited, engine idling. "The reason I've been trying to find the right way to approach you, the reason I hired investigators and sat in the back of school plays like some kind of coward, it's not just about Emma's inheritance or her trust fund." Victoria pulled out her phone, scrolled through something, then showed him the screen. It was a news article dated 3 months ago. Ashworth Industries announces major expansion in rural markets. "I've been planning to build a new facility here in Millbrook. Advanced manufacturing, clean energy technology, about 300 jobs to start. Good jobs, the kind that could revitalize a place like this." Marcus stared at the article, his mind racing. "You're telling me this because I want you to run it," Victoria said simply. "I want you to be the plant manager. Help me build something that would honor what Sarah believed in. Communities that take care of their own, work that means something, a place where families like yours can thrive." She got out of the truck before he could respond, leaning down to speak through the passenger window.
"Marcus," she said, "thank you for saving my life." Sarah would have been proud. As Marcus drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, his mind churned with questions, possibilities, and the weight of choices that would affect not just his future, but Emma's. The bank notice in his back pocket seemed less threatening now, but somehow the stakes felt higher than ever. He had no idea that tomorrow night would bring revelations that made today's surprises seem simpler by comparison. Marcus stood at his kitchen window the next morning, watching steam rise from his coffee mug like prayers he didn't know how to voice. The sun was just cresting the hills beyond Millbrook, painting the snow-covered yards in shades of amber and rose. And for a moment the world looked like the postcard version of small-town America that tourists loved and locals struggled to maintain. Emma sat at the kitchen table behind him, methodically working through a bowl of generic brand cereal, while her math homework lay spread beside her plate like evidence of a crime. Her dark hair, so much like her mother's, so much like Victoria's, he realized now, was pulled back in the lopsided ponytail that had become their morning routine since Sarah died. Marcus could braid hair for construction sites, but 8-year-old girl hair remained a mystery that defeated him daily. "Dad?" Emma's voice carried that particular note of careful concern that children develop when they learn their parents aren't invincible. "Are you okay? You seem different today." Marcus turned from the window, studying his daughter's face, Sarah's brown eyes, his own stubborn chin, and something else, something he was now wondering might be Ashworth's determination. "Different how, sweetheart?" Emma shrugged, the gesture encompassing the existential weight that only third-graders could muster. "Like when you're thinking really hard about grown-up stuff, but trying to pretend you're not thinking about it." The accuracy of her observation hit him square in the chest. Emma had been reading people's moods with unsettling precision since Sarah's death, as if losing one parent had made her hyper-aware of any changes
In the other, it was a skill no 8-year-old should need, a vigilance born of loss that broke Marcus's heart every time he recognized it. "I am thinking about grown-up stuff," Marcus admitted, settling into the chair across from her. "But nothing that changes anything important. You know what's important?" "What?" Emma asked, though her smile suggested she knew the answer to their morning ritual. "You are. And making sure you know how to do long division, apparently." Marcus gestured at her homework, where numbers seemed to multiply and divide with chaotic abandon across several sheets of paper. "How's it going?" "Terrible," Emma said cheerfully. "Mrs. Rodriguez says I'm arithmetically challenged, which I think means I'm bad at math, but she's too nice to say it directly." Marcus felt the familiar stab of parental inadequacy. When Sarah was alive, she'd handled homework while he worked late shifts, trying to build a construction business that never quite materialized. After the accident, he discovered the gaps in his knowledge of his own daughter's daily life. Which friends were closest allies versus casual acquaintances? Which subjects came easily and which required encouragement? How to French braid hair or make conversation about third-grade drama? "Let me take a look," Marcus said, pulling the homework toward him. The problems weren't particularly complex, but Emma's work showed a pattern of careless mistakes and evident frustration. Numbers erased so many times the paper was wearing thin. Calculations that started confidently but devolved into increasingly frantic scribbles. As they worked through the problems together, Marcus trying to channel patience he didn't always feel, Emma's confidence growing with each successful solution, Marcus found himself thinking about Victoria's revelations. The trust fund waiting for Emma's 18th birthday seemed abstract, but the immediate impact was sitting right here at their breakfast table. How many mornings had he rushed through homework help because he needed to leave early for job interviews that led nowhere? How many evenings had Emma done homework alone while he worked his second job at the hardware store, trying to keep them afloat? "Dad, you're doing the thinking face again," Emma observed, her pencil poised over a division problem. "Sorry. Tell me about this one. What's your first step?" They finished the homework just as the school bus pulled up outside, its yellow bulk blocking the morning sun from their front window. Emma gathered her backpack, the same one she'd used for 2 years now, with a broken zipper Marcus kept meaning to fix, and paused at the kitchen door. "Oh, I almost forgot," she said, digging through her backpack. "Mrs. Rodriguez wants you to come to a parent-teacher meeting thing next week. She gave me this letter." Marcus accepted the envelope with a sinking heart. Parent-teacher conferences usually meant discussions about Emma's academic performance, her social adjustment, the subtle ways that financial stress at home manifested in school behavior. He'd been dreading this conversation for weeks. "Am I in trouble?" Emma asked, reading his expression with that uncanny accuracy that he usually loved. "Of course not, sweetheart. Mrs. Rodriguez just wants to talk about how you're doing in school." "So I am in trouble?" Marcus knelt to Emma's level, fixing her backpack strap that had twisted. "Emma, you're not in trouble. Not with me, not with school, not with anybody. Sometimes grown-ups just need to talk about how to help kids be their best selves." Emma studied his face with an intensity that reminded him uncomfortably of Victoria's scrutiny the night before. "Is this about the math?" "Maybe partly, but mostly it's about making sure you're happy and learning and feeling good about school." The school bus honked impatiently, and Emma stood on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. "I love you, Dad, even if I'm arithmetically challenged." "I love you too, Em, even if you're the smartest kid in Millbrook." After Emma left, the house settled into its daytime quiet, the particular silence of a home where only one person rattled around in spaces designed for a family. Marcus cleaned up the breakfast dishes, a routine that took all of 5 minutes, but which he stretched into 10 because the alternative was confronting the day's uncertainties. The folder Victoria had given Marcus sat on his kitchen counter like an unexploded bomb. He'd spent half the night reading through documents that redefined his understanding of his wife, his daughter, and his own place in a story much larger than he'd imagined. Bank statements showing Sarah had been quietly sending small amounts of money to various charities he'd never known about. A scholarship fund she had established for single mothers returning to school. Letters of commendation from volunteer work she had done on weekends when he thought she was running errands. Sarah Elizabeth Ashworth had been a better person than even he had known, and she'd been carrying the weight of a family legacy she deliberately walked away from. "I'd like you to come to dinner tonight," he said when she answered. 6 o'clock. "But Victoria?" "Yes?" "I want to tell Emma who you are. Not about the inheritance, not about the business opportunities, just about the fact that she has an aunt, a family member she's never met." "That sounds perfect. Should I bring anything?" Marcus almost laughed. "What did you ask a billionaire to contribute to spaghetti and generic sauce?" "Just yourself. And Victoria, can you maybe dress down a little? Emma's pretty observant, and if you show up looking like a magazine cover, she's going to have questions I'm not ready to answer." "I understand completely. I'll see you at 6. The afternoon was a blur of nervous energy as Marcus cleaned the house with more attention to detail than it had received in months. He vacuumed the ancient carpet, scrubbed the bathroom until it sparkled, organized the living room so it looked intentionally sparse rather than accidentally poor. He drove to the grocery store and spent money he couldn't afford on ingredients for a real dinner. Fresh pasta instead of the boxed stuff, actual Parmesan cheese instead of the powdered version. A bottle of wine that cost more than they usually spent on groceries in 3 days. At 3:30, he positioned himself at the front window to watch for Emma's school bus, his stomach churning with anticipation and dread. How did you prepare an 8-year-old for the revelation that her family was larger and more complicated than she'd ever imagined? The bus pulled up with its usual hydraulic wheeze, and Emma bounded down the steps with the boundless energy that had survived everything life had thrown at her. She waved to her friend Jessica through the bus window, shouldered her backpack, and jogged up their front walkway with a grin that made Marcus's heart ache with fierce protectiveness. "Dad," she called, bursting through the front door, "guess what happened at school today?" "What happened, sweetheart?" "Tyler Morrison brought his hamster for show and tell, but it escaped and ran under Mrs. Rodriguez's desk, and she screamed so loud that Mr. Patterson came running from the next classroom, thinking there was an emergency, but it was just Fluffy exploring the pencil sharpener." Emma's laughter filled the living room, bright and infectious, and Marcus felt his resolve solidify. Whatever complications Victoria's presence might bring to their lives, Emma deserved to know she had family beyond just him. She deserved options, connections, the security of knowing she wasn't alone in the world if something happened to her father. "Em," Marcus said, settling onto the couch so he could look at her directly, "I need to tell you something. We're going to have a visitor for dinner tonight." Emma's expression shifted to curiosity mixed with slight alarm. They rarely had visitors, and unexpected guests usually meant bad news in their experience. "Who's coming?" "A woman named Victoria. She's family, Em. Your family." "What kind of family?" I took a deep breath. "She was your mom's sister, your aunt." Emma processed this information with the careful attention she brought to complex math problems. "But Mom didn't have any family. She told me her parents died when she was young and she didn't have brothers or sisters." "I thought that too, sweetheart, but it turns out your mom had a sister she'd lost touch with. Victoria found us recently and wanted to meet you." "Found us how?" The questions were getting more complex, and I realized I was navigating a minefield of partial truths and adult complications. Sometimes families get separated for grown-up reasons, and it takes time to find each other again. Victoria's been looking for us for a long time. Emma studied his face with that unnerving intensity. "Is she nice?" "I think so. I only met her yesterday, but she seems very kind." "And Em, she loved your mom very much. They had some difficulties that kept them apart. Like when Jessica and I had that fight about the swing set, but then we made up?" "Sort of like that, except it lasted much longer." Emma nodded solemnly. "Okay. Should I wear my good dress?" "You should wear whatever makes you comfortable. Victoria's coming to meet you, not judge what you're wearing." As Emma ran upstairs to change clothes, opting for her favorite jeans and the sweater Sarah had knitted for her 7th birthday, Marcus returned to the kitchen to start dinner preparations. His hands shook slightly as he chopped onions, whether from nerves or anticipation he couldn't say. At exactly 6 o'clock, a soft knock came at the front door. Marcus opened it to find Victoria standing on his porch, and he barely recognized her. Gone was the polished executive from the news articles. This Victoria wore simple jeans, a wool sweater that had seen better days, and sneakers that looked like they'd actually been walked in. Her hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail, and she carried a small bouquet of flowers that looked like they'd come from a grocery store rather than an expensive florist. "Hi," she said simply. "Hi," Marcus replied. "Come in." Victoria stepped into their living room and looked around with genuine interest rather than judgment. Her gaze lingered on the photos scattered around the room. Emma's school pictures, Sarah's favorite snapshot from their wedding day, Emma's artwork taped to the refrigerator and visible from the front door. "Emma," Marcus called upstairs, "our guest is here." The sound of feet thundering downstairs preceded Emma's appearance in the living room, where she stopped abruptly and studied Victoria with 8-year-old directness. "You look like my mom," she said without preamble. Victoria's breath caught audibly. "Do I?" "Yeah, around the eyes. And you're the right height. Mom was short too." Victoria smiled, and the resemblance became even more pronounced. "Your mom and I used to joke that we got the short genes in the family. Are you Emma?" "Yes, ma'am." "Dad says you're my aunt, but I've never had an aunt before, so I'm not sure what we're supposed to do." "Well," Victoria said, settling onto the couch at Emma's eye level, "I've never been an aunt before either, so maybe we can figure it out together. I brought you these." She offered the flowers to Emma, who accepted them with the reverence children reserve for unexpected gifts. "They're pretty. Should I put them in water?" "That would be perfect." As Emma disappeared into the kitchen to find a vase, Victoria turned to Marcus with tears in her eyes. "She's extraordinary," she whispered. "She is," Marcus agreed.
And she's been through enough changes in her life. I need to know that whatever this is, whatever you're offering, it's not going to disappear if things get complicated. I'm not going anywhere, Marcus. I promise you that. Dinner was surprisingly easy. Victoria asked Emma about school, listened with genuine interest to stories about hamster escapes and playground politics, and shared carefully edited stories about Sarah's childhood, adventures that painted Sarah as brave and clever without revealing the wealth and complications of the Ashworth family. "Mom used to build the best blanket forts," Emma said, twirling pasta around her fork with the concentration of a surgeon. "Did she do that when she was little too?" "Oh yes," Victoria laughed. "Your mom once built a fort so elaborate that it took up our entire living room. She used every sheet and blanket in the house, plus some towels and a tablecloth. Our parents couldn't watch television for 3 days because they couldn't bear to take it down." Emma giggled. "That sounds like Mom." "Dad, remember the fort we built during the snowstorm?" Marcus remembered. 3 days snowed in, Sarah's laughter filling their small house as they constructed an architectural marvel of pillows and creativity. Some of his happiest memories were bound up in ordinary moments like that, times when their lack of money hadn't mattered because they'd had each other. "She was always building things," Marcus said. "Forts, gardens, dreams. Your mom had big plans for this place." "What kind of plans?" Victoria asked gently. Marcus gestured toward the back window where Sarah's neglected garden plot was buried under February snow. "She wanted to grow vegetables, maybe sell them at the farmer's market. She talked about getting chickens, turning this place into a real homestead. She had notebooks full of ideas." "Can I see them?" After Emma went upstairs to work on a school project, Marcus pulled out Sarah's planning notebooks, spiral-bound compositions filled with sketches, lists, dreams mapped out in Sarah's careful handwriting. Victoria turned the pages slowly, studying each drawing and plan with the attention of an archaeologist examining precious artifacts.
She was going to call it Willow Creek Farm, Marcus said, pointing to a page where Sarah had practiced different versions of the name in decorative lettering. "Even though we don't have a creek, she said we'd build a pond and stock it with fish." Victoria traced one of Sarah's sketches with her finger. She always loved projects. When we were kids, she was constantly starting something new. Knitting projects, science experiments, elaborate plans for rearranging her bedroom. Most of them never got finished, but the enthusiasm was always there. "These would have gotten finished," Marcus said with certainty. Sarah didn't leave things undone once Emma came along. Parenthood made her more focused, more determined. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, connected by their shared love for someone who was gone, but still present in every corner of the house she'd made home. "Marcus," Victoria said eventually, "can I ask you something personal?" He nodded. "When you're lying awake at night, worrying about bills and Emma's future and whether you're doing enough, what do you wish for? If you could change one thing about your situation, what would it be?" The question caught him off guard with its directness. "That's easy. I wish I could give Emma the childhood Sarah wanted for her. Not just financially, though that's part of it. I wish I could give her stability, opportunities, the confidence that comes from knowing your family has your back no matter what." "What if I told you that's exactly what I want to give her too?" Marcus looked at Victoria carefully. She was leaning forward in her chair, her expression serious but hopeful, and he could see both Sarah and Emma in the set of her jaw. "That sounds too good to be true. The plant manager position I mentioned yesterday, it's real, Marcus. We're breaking ground on the Millbrook facility in 6 months. I need someone local, someone who understands this community, someone I can trust completely." "And you think that's me?" "I know it's you. I've spent months researching your background, your work history, your reputation in this town. You're exactly what this project needs." Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered streets of Millbrook.
3 months ago, the idea of running a major manufacturing facility would have seemed like fantasy. Now, with Emma upstairs working on homework and Victoria sitting in his living room offering him a future he'd stopped daring to imagine, it felt like destiny wearing a disguise. What about the inheritance, Emma's trust fund? Completely separate. That money belongs to her regardless of whether you take the job, regardless of whether we ever speak again after tonight. It's her birthright as Sarah's daughter. And if I say no to the job, then I'll respect your decision and find another way to be part of Emma's life. But Marcus, I hope you won't say no. This community needs what we're planning to build here, and I need someone who cares about Millbrook the way you do. Emma's voice drifted down from upstairs. She was singing while working, a habit she had inherited from Sarah. The sound filled the house with warmth that had been missing since Sarah's death, and Marcus realized that part of what he was hearing was hope. I need time to think about it, he said finally. Of course, take all the time you need. Victoria stayed until Emma came back downstairs to say goodnight, and Marcus watched his daughter hug her aunt with the easy affection that came naturally to children who'd been raised with love. As Victoria prepared to leave, Emma tugged on her sleeve. Aunt Victoria, will you come visit us again? I'd love to, sweetheart. Would that be okay with you? Emma looked to Marcus for confirmation, then nodded enthusiastically. Maybe next time you can tell me more stories about Mom when she was little. I have lots of stories, Victoria promised. After Victoria left, Marcus tucked Emma into bed and listened to her prayers, a ritual Sarah had started that included gratitude for the good parts of each day and hopes for tomorrow's adventures.
The question hung in the air, and Marcus realized he was facing a choice he'd been avoiding for weeks. He could explain the family connection, reveal the truth about Sarah's background and Emma's inheritance, and probably convince the room that Victoria's interest in Millbrook was genuine. Or he could protect Emma's privacy and his own family's secrets and accept whatever judgment the community rendered based on incomplete information. Miss Ashworth researched potential candidates throughout the region, Marcus said carefully. She chose me based on my professional qualifications and my connection to this community. What qualifications? Harold pressed. You've been unemployed for 4 months. Before that, you were a construction supervisor at a company that went under. What makes you qualified to run a high-tech manufacturing facility? The question hit like a physical blow, striking directly at Marcus's deepest insecurities. For weeks, he'd been reading technical manuals, studying manufacturing processes, trying to convince himself he could grow into the role Victoria was offering. But Harold's challenge forced him to confront the gap between his background and the job's requirements. I've been in construction management for 12 years, Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. I've supervised teams of up to 50 workers, managed complex projects with million-dollar budgets, maintained safety records that exceeded industry standards. Manufacturing supervision requires the same core skills: project management, team leadership, quality control, regulatory compliance. That's a nice speech, said Janet Walsh. But construction and high-tech manufacturing aren't the same thing. Are you telling us you're qualified to oversee clean energy technology production? I'm telling you I'm committed to learning whatever I need to learn to do the job well. And I'm telling you that I care more about this community's future than anyone else Ashworth Industries might hire from outside. The room fell quiet, and Marcus could feel the weight of judgment from people who'd known him since childhood, who'd watched him struggle through Sarah's death and the months of unemployment that followed. Some faces showed sympathy, others skepticism, but most reflected the exhausted wariness of a community that had been promised economic salvation too many times before. Let's talk specifics, said Council President Robert Hayes, a retired teacher who'd been trying to maintain order throughout the discussion. What exactly is Ashworth proposing? Timeline, employment numbers, infrastructure requirements? Marcus clicked through his presentation slides, grateful for the return to concrete details. Phase 1 construction begins in May, with completion scheduled for March of next year. Initial employment of 300 workers, scaling to 500 within 3 years.
The facility will require upgrades to our electrical grid and water treatment capacity, but Ashworth Industries will fund those improvements. 300 jobs sounds impressive, but what's the catch? There's always a catch with these big corporate projects. The catch is that we need to provide them. Ashworth isn't importing workers from other states. They want to hire locally, which means we need people with appropriate skills or the willingness to learn them. The company will provide training programs, but workers need basic qualifications: high school diploma, reliable transportation, ability to pass drug tests and background checks. So they want us to provide the workers and the town to provide the infrastructure improvements, Harold summarized. What are they providing besides promises? Marcus felt his patience fraying. He'd spent hours preparing for this meeting, anticipating objections and crafting responses, but the persistent negativity was wearing down his confidence. They're providing jobs, Harold. Good jobs with benefits in a town where half the young people leave after high school because there's nothing here for them. Easy to say when you're the one getting the management position, Harold shot back. What about the rest of us? What about the businesses that have been here for decades, that have survived recessions and plant closures and every other economic disaster? This isn't about replacing existing businesses. It's about creating new opportunities, bringing in workers who'll shop at your hardware store, eat at Janet's Diner, buy groceries from Tom. A manufacturing facility doesn't compete with local retail, it supports it. Like all those workers will be able to afford shopping local instead of driving to the big box stores in the county seat, Janet said bitterly. We've heard this story before, Marcus. New jobs come in, promise to revitalize everything, but somehow the money never stays in town. The meeting continued for another hour, with Marcus fielding questions that ranged from technical details about manufacturing processes to philosophical challenges about corporate responsibility. Some questions were fair and thoughtful. Others felt like personal attacks disguised as community concern. As the evening wore on, Marcus began to understand that the skepticism wasn't really about Ashworth Industries or manufacturing jobs. It was about change itself, about a community that had been battered by economic forces beyond their control and was now being asked to trust that this time would be different. I know you have reasons to be skeptical. I know this community has been disappointed before. But I also know that doing nothing isn't working. Our population has declined 15% in the past decade. Our school enrollment is dropping. Our downtown has more empty storefronts than occupied ones.
He paused, looking around the room at faces that had become familiar over years of community events, school functions, the shared spaces of small-town life. This isn't about me getting a job, Marcus continued. It's about Emma having a reason to stay in Millbrook after she graduates high school. It's about your kids and grandkids being able to build lives here instead of leaving for opportunities in bigger cities. It's about having something to offer besides nostalgia for better times. The room was quiet now, and Marcus could sense a shift in the atmosphere. Not agreement necessarily, but recognition of shared concerns. "What guarantees can you give us?" asked Sandra Kim. "What happens if the project fails? If Ashworth pulls out? If the jobs don't materialize as promised?" Marcus looked down at his presentation materials, then back at the room. "I can't give you guarantees, Sandra. I wish I could, but I can't promise the future will turn out exactly as we hope. What I can promise is that I'll fight for this community every day, that I'll hold Ashworth Industries accountable to their commitments, and that I'll quit before I let anyone treat Millbrook as disposable." After the meeting ended, Marcus stood in the parking lot watching people file out of the town hall in small groups, their conversations continuing in hushed tones. Some offered encouraging words as they passed, good luck wishes and expressions of cautious support. Others avoided eye contact entirely. Harold Brennan approached as Marcus was loading his presentation materials into his truck. "You did all right in Mar," Harold said gruffly. "Better than I expected." "Thanks, I think." "Don't thank me yet. You've got a long road ahead of you, convincing this town that corporate promises are worth believing. A lot of us have been burned before." "I understand that, Harold. I've been burned too. By the construction company that laid me off, by the economy that made it impossible to start my own business, by circumstances I couldn't control. But sometimes you have to take risks to change your situation."
Harold studied Marcus's face in the parking lot's harsh streetlight. Maybe. Just remember, when this goes wrong, if it goes wrong, it's not just your reputation on the line. It's the whole community's trust that gets damaged. As Marcus drove home through Millbrook's quiet streets, he passed the landmarks of his adult life. The diner where he'd met Sarah, the park where they'd been married, the school where Emma was learning to navigate a world more complicated than either of her parents had experienced. Each familiar sight reminded him of the weight of responsibility he'd accepted, the way his personal choices were now bound up with the community's future. At home, Emma was already asleep, but she'd left a drawing on the kitchen table, a crayon masterpiece showing their house surrounded by flowers with stick figures labeled Dad, Me, and Aunt Victoria standing in a garden that looked suspiciously like Sarah's sketched plans. Marcus studied the drawing while reheating leftover coffee, struck by how easily Emma had incorporated Victoria into their family narrative. For 8-year-olds, family was simple. People who cared about you, who showed up when they said they would, who made time for important things like homework help and bedtime stories. For adults, family was more complicated, especially when it came with billions of dollars and expectations that could reshape entire communities. His phone buzzed again with a text from Victoria. "Marcus, there's something else we need to discuss. Can you meet me tomorrow? There's been a development with the project that you need to know about." The message sent a chill through Marcus that had nothing to do with the February cold. In his experience, developments were rarely good news, and Victoria's careful phrasing suggested complications he wasn't prepared to handle. He texted back, "What kind of development?" Marcus looked around the coffee shop at the familiar faces of his neighbors, people who were counting on him to deliver the opportunities he'd promised, people who would blame him personally if the project failed. The weight of responsibility felt crushing. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to testify at the legislative hearing, to represent not just our project but the perspective of workers and communities that need investment to survive, to help lawmakers understand that economic development incentives aren't corporate welfare when they create real opportunities for real people." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Public testimony meant media attention, political pressure, scrutiny from people who could destroy his reputation and his family's future with a few carefully chosen words. "And if I refuse?" Victoria's expression was understanding but resigned. "Then the project probably dies in committee. Senator Williams uses us as a cautionary tale about corporate overreach, and Millbrook continues its slow decline while politicians congratulate themselves on protecting it from exploitation." The cruel irony wasn't lost on Marcus. To save his community from economic stagnation, he had to risk everything in a political arena where he had no experience and no allies. When is the hearing? March 15th, 6 weeks from today. "I need to think about this, Victoria. I need to talk to Emma, figure out what this means for our lives." "Of course. But Marcus?" Victoria reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know that I believe in you. Sarah would be proud of what you're trying to do for Emma and for this community." After Victoria left, Marcus sat alone in the coffee shop for another hour, watching Millbrook's daily rhythm through the front window. School buses delivering children to their futures, workers heading to jobs that paid barely enough to survive, elderly residents navigating sidewalks that the town couldn't afford to maintain properly. Everyone he saw was counting on the changes he'd promised to deliver, and now those promises were balanced on the edge of political battles he didn't understand and couldn't control. His phone rang, Emma's school, calling to remind him about the parent-teacher conference scheduled for that afternoon. Another responsibility, another conversation about Emma's future in a world that seemed to be shifting beneath their feet faster than Marcus could adapt. As he gathered his things to leave,
Penny Martinez approached his table with a fresh cup of coffee. "This one's on the house. I heard you had a rough night at the town hall meeting." Word travels fast in a small town. It does, and for what it's worth, I think what you're trying to do is brave. Maybe a little crazy, but brave. "Thanks, Penny. I hope it works out." "It will," she said with the confidence of someone who'd survived multiple economic downturns and still believed in better futures. "This town has been waiting for someone like you to take a risk for all of us." As Marcus walked back to his truck, he realized that Penny was right. He had become the person taking risks for everyone. The question now was whether he had the courage to take the biggest risk of all, trusting that his voice could make a difference in places where voices like his were rarely heard. 6 weeks until the hearing. 6 weeks to prepare for a battle that would determine not just his family's future, but the future of everyone in Millbrook who dared to hope that change was possible. The parent-teacher conference that afternoon felt like a sanctuary compared to the political storm clouds gathering around Marcus's life. Emma's classroom smelled of crayons and construction paper, decorated with the bright optimism that only elementary schools could maintain in the face of winter's persistence. Mrs. Rodriguez greeted Marcus with the warm professionalism that had made Emma's favorite teacher, but her expression carried undertones of concern that made Marcus's chest tighten with familiar parental anxiety. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Chen. I know you have a lot going on right now with the new job opportunity." Marcus settled into the tiny chair beside Emma's desk, surrounded by her artwork and projects that spoke to her creativity he'd inherited from Sarah. "How is she doing? Really doing?" "Emma is brilliant," Mrs. Rodriguez said without hesitation. "Her reading comprehension is at least 2 grade levels above average. Her writing shows remarkable emotional intelligence for her age, and her creativity consistently surprises me. But
she's been carrying worry that shows up in subtle ways. Difficulty concentrating during math lessons, which used to be her strongest subject. Questions about family stability that surfaced during unrelated discussions. Last week, during a unit on community helpers, she asked me whether police officers could make parents keep their jobs. The observation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He thought he'd been protecting Emma from the worst of their financial stress, maintaining routines and reassurances while privately wrestling with uncertainty. But children absorbed anxiety through osmosis, reading adult emotions with the uncanny accuracy of creatures whose survival depended on understanding their caregivers' moods. "She's worried about the house," Marcus said quietly, "about whether we'll have to move. Has she talked to you about these concerns?" "Not directly. Emma's protective of me, tries not to add to my problems. She's been that way since Sarah died, more aware of adult emotions, more careful about expressing her own needs." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded with the understanding of someone who'd seen too many children forced into premature emotional maturity by circumstances beyond their control. "There's something else I want to discuss with you. Emma mentioned that she has an aunt now, someone named Victoria, who's been visiting." Marcus felt heat rise in his face. Of course Emma had talked about Victoria at school. Children didn't naturally compartmentalize family relationships the way adults did. Victoria is Sarah's sister. They'd been estranged for many years, and Victoria recently reconnected with us. Emma seems very happy about having extended family. She's mentioned Victoria several times during morning sharing, always with excitement and affection. Victoria's been wonderful with Emma, very patient, very interested in Emma's life and thoughts. Mrs. Rodriguez studied Marcus's face with the careful attention teachers develop for reading between the lines of family dynamics. "Mr. Chen, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is Victoria's presence connected to the job opportunity you've been discussing in the community?" The question was delicately phrased, but Marcus understood its implications. Teachers were often the first to notice when children's circumstances changed, when new stability or new stress manifested in classroom behavior. Mrs. Rodriguez was trying to understand whether Victoria represented positive change or potential upheaval in Emma's life. Victoria works for the company that's planning to build the manufacturing facility, but her relationship with Emma isn't conditional on my job. She's family, regardless of any professional connections. I'm glad to hear that. Emma's mentioned several times that Victoria knew her mother, that she has stories about Sarah that Emma had never heard before. Marcus nodded, thinking about the evenings Victoria had spent at their house, sharing carefully edited memories of Sarah's childhood, while Emma listened with the focused attention she reserved for stories about the mother she was gradually forgetting. Mrs. Rodriguez, how concerned should I be about Emma's academic performance? Are these concentration issues something that will resolve themselves, or do they indicate deeper problems? In my experience, children's academic performance reflects their emotional security. When family stress decreases, when children feel confident about their stability, their schoolwork typically improves. Emma's underlying capabilities are strong. She just needs reassurance that the adults in her life are handling their responsibilities competently. The gentle criticism wasn't lost on Marcus. Emma needed to believe that her father was in control, that the adult world held solutions to its problems, that she could focus on age-appropriate concerns like friendships and homework, instead of worrying about mortgage payments and job security. Is there anything specific I should be doing to help her? Continue being honest with her about changes in your family circumstances, but frame those changes as positive developments rather than sources of stress. Children need to feel that their parents view the future optimistically, even when that optimism requires effort. As Marcus left, Mrs. Rodriguez called out to him, "Mr. Chen, what do you think your child needs most from her mother?" Marcus stopped and turned back. The question took him by surprise. Victoria had already mentioned that she'd made efforts to bring the memory of Sarah to life for Emma, offering glimpses of the past as though they carried the essence of the love Emma had held for Sarah. But Marcus knew that stories alone weren't enough. What Emma really needed was someone she could trust, someone to lean on when she felt the weight of her own fears and uncertainties. He wondered how Victoria would fit into this delicate balance. She was Sarah's sister, and she shared a physical resemblance that made Emma feel like she was with her mother again. But trust, which was essential for a child's emotional well-being, could not be gained or won with stories. It had to be earned.
The response was meant to be comforting, but it reminded Marcus of how much his daughter's well-being now depended on relationships and opportunities that had materialized almost overnight. What would happen to Emma's sense of security if the political opposition succeeded? If the manufacturing project collapsed? If Victoria's promises proved as ephemeral as everything else that had disappointed their community? That evening, as Marcus helped Emma with homework at the kitchen table, he found himself studying her face for signs of the worry Mrs. Rodriguez had described. Emma worked through her reading assignment with focused concentration, occasionally asking questions about vocabulary or story details, but her demeanor seemed normal, the comfortable routine of a child secure in her father's attention. "Dad," Emma said as she closed her book, "Aunt Victoria said she might take me to see where Mom grew up. Is that okay?" The question caught Marcus off guard. Victoria had mentioned wanting to share more of Sarah's history with Emma, but he hadn't expected specific plans to emerge so quickly. "Where did Mom grow up, Em?" "Boston. Aunt Victoria showed me pictures on her phone. Tall buildings and a harbor with boats. It looks really different from here." Marcus realized that Victoria was gradually revealing more of Sarah's true background, helping Emma understand her heritage without overwhelming her with complicated family dynamics. But the idea of Emma traveling to Boston, seeing the world Sarah had deliberately left behind, raised questions Marcus wasn't ready to answer. "That sounds like it could be a wonderful trip," Marcus said carefully. "We'll talk about it when you're older, maybe during summer vacation." "How much older? I'm already 8 3/4. Marcus smiled at Emma's precise age calculation,
a habit she'd developed since turning 8, as if the fractions of years mattered enormously in her progression toward adulthood. "We'll see, sweetheart. There are some grown-up things I need to figure out first." After Emma went to bed, Marcus called Victoria, needing to understand her intentions before Emma's expectations grew beyond what circumstances might allow. "She mentioned Boston," Marcus said, without preamble, when Victoria answered. "I thought she might. I showed her some photos of Sarah's childhood neighborhood, the school she attended, places where we played together. Emma was fascinated by the idea that her mother had lived somewhere so different from Millbrook." "Victoria, I need to know what you're planning. Emma's starting to think about trips and experiences that might not be possible, depending on how things go with the legislative hearing." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Marcus, regardless of what happens with the manufacturing project, Emma is my niece. The trust fund exists independently of any business relationships. Her connection to the Ashworth family isn't conditional on political outcomes." "But your presence in our lives might be. If the project fails, if Senator Williams succeeds in painting you as a corporate predator, are you going to disappear back to Boston and leave Emma wondering what happened to her aunt? Is that what you think I'd do?" The hurt in Victoria's voice was unmistakable, and Marcus realized his fears were making him unfairly suspicious of someone who'd shown nothing but genuine care for Emma's well-being. "I don't know what to think," Marcus admitted. 3 weeks ago, I was unemployed and 3 months behind my mortgage. Now I'm supposed to testify before state legislators about economic development policy. Emma has an aunt she adores, and our entire future depends on political outcomes I can't control. It's overwhelming." "I understand that. But Marcus, my commitment to Emma isn't political or professional, it's personal. She's the only connection I have left to Sarah, and she's become important to me in her own right. Whatever happens with business or politics, I'm not walking away from her." Marcus found himself believing her, not because her words were particularly convincing, but because of the way Victoria had looked at Emma during their dinners together, with the same fierce protectiveness he recognized in himself. "Tell me about the legislative hearing. What exactly am I walking into?" "A room full of politicians who view corporate subsidies skeptically, media representatives looking for conflict, and policy advocates who have made careers out of opposing projects like ours. You'll have 15 minutes to explain why Millbrook deserves investment, why the jobs we're creating are worth the tax incentives we're requesting, and why rural economic development matters to the state's overall prosperity." "And if I fail?"
Marcus looked out at the room full of people whose decisions would determine his community's future, took a deep breath, and began to speak not as a policy expert or corporate representative, but as a father who believed his daughter deserved the same opportunities as children in wealthier communities. "Senators, I'm here because my 8-year-old daughter asked me last week whether we were going to lose our house," Marcus began. "I'm here because half the storefronts in my town's downtown are empty, because our high school graduation classes get smaller every year, because families like mine have been waiting for economic opportunities that never seem to arrive." As he spoke, Marcus found his voice growing stronger, his nervousness replaced by the conviction that came from representing something larger than personal interests. He talked about specific families, individual workers whose talents were being wasted, young people whose potential was constrained by geography and economic circumstances. When he finished, Senator Williams nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. Your testimony has given us much to consider." The committee voted 3 weeks later to approve the tax incentives, with Senator Williams casting the deciding ballot and citing the need to balance skepticism about corporate subsidies with recognition of rural communities' economic realities. Construction began on schedule in May, and by the following March, the Millbrook Advanced Manufacturing Facility was producing its first solar panel components. Marcus had learned to navigate the complexities of high-tech manufacturing. Victoria had become a permanent fixture in Emma's life, and their small town had begun the careful process of reinventing itself around new possibilities. Emma's 9th birthday party was held in the backyard garden that Sarah had planned but never planted, vegetables and flowers growing in neat rows tended by 3 generations of family that had found each other despite decades of separation. As Marcus watched his daughter blow out candles surrounded by friends whose parents now had stable employment, he realized that sometimes the most important changes began with simple acts of courage. Pulling a stranger from frozen water, accepting opportunities that seemed too good to be true, trusting that family bonds could survive the complications of wealth and responsibility. The ice on Willowbrook Lake melted that spring, as it had every year for centuries, but the community that surrounded it had been transformed by the connections formed during one February evening when a desperate father chose to risk everything to save someone else's life and discovered that sometimes salvation worked both ways. Victoria kept her promise to take Emma to Boston that summer, where Emma walked the streets her mother had known, visited the school Sarah had attended, and began to understand the legacy of strength and determination that had shaped both sides of her family. But at the end of each day, as they video-called Marcus from their hotel room, Emma was clear about where her heart remained. In the small town where her father had built a life worth saving, in the community that had given her roots deep enough to support whatever dreams her future might hold. The manufacturing facility thrived. Senator Williams won re-election on a platform that balanced corporate accountability with pragmatic economic development. And Marcus Chen became known throughout the state as proof that rural communities could adapt and prosper when given genuine opportunities rather than empty promises. But the story that mattered most was simpler. A daughter who knew she was loved unconditionally, a father who'd learned to accept help without sacrificing dignity, and an aunt who discovered that family was worth any amount of complexity or inconvenience. Sometimes salvation came disguised as catastrophe, and the bravest thing you could do was trust that the people who mattered would still be there when the ice finally melted.